I'm Elizabeth Ray.
I'm Alistair Stevens.
And Tom Cruise is David Ames in Vanilla Sky.
In last week's show, we talked about how we had hit the halfway point in Tom Cruise's filmography as of this date, as of this recording. But really, it's only in this episode that we move into the back half in a purposeful and meaningful way, because this is the episode that marks the first post-Kidman Tom Cruise movie. And that's going to have repercussions. That is going to absolutely change the trajectory of his career over the next 10 or 15 films. It's going to have a huge influence. And it had a huge influence on her career too, only, for good, for success, and for domestic happiness, I guess. This is the timeline. On February the 5th, 2001, a statement was released from Cruise and Kidman together saying that they were separating amicably after 11 years of marriage. To prove that that was absolutely true, 2 days later, Tom Cruise files for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. On August 8th, the divorce is finalized, and we have all seen those pictures of Nicole Kidman taken immediately afterwards, green skirt and pink top, and, joyous freedom. The book Going Clear by Lawrence Wright, and the film adaptation of that book, directed by Alex Gibney, claims that David Miscavige and the Church of Scientology forced the breakup, fearful that Kidman's influence was taking Cruise away from his involvement in the church, specifically dating those accusations to the time that they spent in London shooting Eyes Wide Shut, where he just had domestic happiness for a couple of years. Kidman, we should note, has never talked publicly about Scientology because her children, Connor and Isabella, the two kids that she adopted with Cruise during their marriage, are both still practicing Scientologists. The only statement that she makes is that her children are Scientologists and she fully and completely respects their faith. End quote.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's an interesting tidbit. I really do try to avoid all of this when I'm doing any research or looking around or even thinking about the podcast.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised to hear that. I think I had something more sinister in the back of my brain.
It is sinister. Let's be clear.
Well, obviously, yes.
It is salacious. It is unbecoming. It is not usually the kind of thing that I am in any way interested in, but it is so completely necessary to understand this break in order to understand the next 10 years of Tom Cruise's career. Because without this, the choices that he makes publicly are baffling. I mean, they're baffling anyway.
They're baffling anyway, but you need context for them.
Absolutely indefensible at a certain point. So we really do need to, bid Nicole Kidman a happy farewell from this podcast.
She seems to be loving her life with Keith Urban, so I think that she's doing really well for herself. And
exactly right.
Yeah, no problems. And getting the AFI Lifetime Achievement Award this year.
Absolutely.
Congratulations.
Between those two, was also secretly engaged to Lenny Kravitz, which is wild.
What?
Yeah,
That's
circa 2003. She bounced back pretty quick.
Cool.
We did a quick recap of her career in the Eyes Wide Shut episode, of course. Let's quickly cover it again, though. 3 months after separating from Cruise, Moulin Rouge is released. This is before the divorce, which earns her first Oscar nomination for Best Actress. The following year, she will win that award for The Hours. It is inarguable that immediately post-divorce, she gets the critical respect that Cruise, A, does not get post-divorce, and B, has kind of always sought, has always really been pushing for. Her career hits a weird slide too, but that's more to do with the fact that she is aging out of the available roles in Hollywood and is therefore having to take more avant-garde stuff. But you're absolutely right. In the last, 5 years, we have seen a real resurgence in Kidman, and long may it continue as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, hear.
We mentioned, of course, her marriage to Keith Urban, Australian New Zealand country singer Keith Urban. They seem very happy together.
They do. They always seem delightful on red carpets.
There's a really interesting quote, and this is not really relevant, I suppose, but there's a really interesting quote where she talks about her relationship with Keith Urban and how they did not know each other until they got married, and then they got to know each other and really fall in love only after the wedding. Which I find so interesting.
Yeah. That's really lovely.
But a long-standing relationship, again, long may it continue. Of course, Cruise's private life is not so happy, though the next phase will be 3 years of dating Penelope Cruz. 3 years.
He really did date her for 3 years. I had it in my mind that the whole thing was just flashbulbs and smoke and look over here. But were they really dating? That's interesting.
They were really dating. They went to innumerable public events together. They were,
I'm sure they were a hot couple.
I mean,
ish.
Yes.
Maybe.
Right. There were just question marks over it, right? It's just weird.
Okay.
It's weird that it happened so quickly. It's weird that it was so he approached the marketing of that relationship in exactly the same way as he approaches the marketing of his movies, which is this overzealous, commitment to the bit, which of course is going to reach its culmination not with Penelope Cruz, luckily, who dodges that bullet, but with Katie Holmes, who we'll talk about in just a few episodes' time here. That's setting the stage for what is a really weird film, right? The second swing from Cameron Crowe with Tom Cruise. Crowe and Cruise are apparently very good friends in real life. They will just get together, hang out, watch movies. They both apparently compulsively watch movies even now. They will delve into the archive. They will watch everything new that comes out.
That's cool.
Just to stay relevant. And they will just hang out at each other's houses watching movies, which is kind of cute.
That's kind of cute.
You don't think about Tom Cruise having like guy friends like that.
But
Cameron Crowe, weird in a very different way than Tom Cruise, but maybe just as weird, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, obviously, of course, capitalizing on the success of the brilliant Jerry Maguire.
Which we loved so much. Yeah. Currently our number one, right?
Absolutely right. And a good candidate for number one at the very end of this entire podcast process.
Yeah, that will be a hard one to knock down from the throne.
Vanilla Sky is so much weirder, not just than that film, than most films.
I would never have guessed that it was Cameron Crowe if someone didn't tell me, and I didn't obviously, see the credits. But
except it has all of Cameron Crowe's fingerprints all over it. It has constant pop culture references. It has all of those very architected lines. All of the dialogue is not all of the dialogue, I guess.
Not all of it, but sometimes.
Every scene has at least one. Every scene has at least one line where you go, "Ooh, you really wrote the hell out of that, didn't you?" And sometimes paren complimentary, sometimes paren derogatory, right? I think that the dialogue in this film is, so Crowe and yet so inconsistent.
Very
in a very weird way.
The whole film to me felt like it had inconsistency. Well, obviously it has inconsistencies, but I meant almost like a camel. Like you want to think that there are several screenwriters attached, but it's really just him. And then this...
And not just him. He's taking the entire story from a source film.
Right, which I haven't seen. How close are they?
Extremely similar.
Is it really?
Yes, it's extremely similar.
That's so odd. Okay, I would like to see the original, I think.
I would too, yeah.
Because then it's just a very different kind of South American magical realism, I would imagine, right?
Which might be a really interesting take on a film like this, on a story like this, particularly when juxtaposed with, what is increasingly evidently Cameron Crowe's materialism, right? His idea that everything can be externalized into the stuff that you own and the stuff that you like, which is exactly what he's pushing back against in Jerry Maguire. And here, it isn't just totemic. It is the key to understanding what is happening in this film. It's such a weird shift. We're going to talk a little more about Crowe on the other side of the trailer game because it's my turn this week.
Ooh.
Here we go.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So this one time I was dreaming that I was late for a test at my old high school, only I couldn't get through the door because it was locked and also all of my teeth had fallen out. Only it wasn't my old high school, it was really a school for talking cartoon dogs, except one of the talking cartoon dogs had the voice of my old principal and said that I wasn't going to amount to anything, and anyway, when I woke up, my pillow was gone. 2 Cruises, 2 Camerons, multiple pop culture references, 1 Vanilla Sky. So last week on the show, we dared to ask the question, the very brave question, I think, was Mission Impossible 2 the last of Cruise's weirdly horny movies? Now we know the answer, and it's kinda.
Yeah,
he's a little weirdly horny in this film.
The movie has such a weird perspective on sex and possession and, I guess, romance, if you want to call it romance. And
the idea of romance, right? Like the way that a moment of romance, a moment of connection, and coupled with the idea of the beacon of romance on the horizon can be enough. That this can guide you through the tempests of life is such a sentimental idea. It's so far away from Jerry Maguire. And I don't just want to turn this podcast into hey, remember Jerry Maguire and how good that was?
Yeah, and how great Dorothy was.
Because I think that there are really good and interesting things about Vanilla Sky. And we both talked last week about how much we were looking forward to this episode because we both remembered really liking this movie.
I don't think I said I remembered really liking it. I just remembered that there were things about it that interested me. I was looking forward to going back to it.
Sure. I think that going back to it is in some ways the problem. We'll probably circle back around to this at the end of the podcast, but I think that the first viewing of this film is going to necessarily be much more impactful than any subsequent viewing, because once you know what is coming, the film doesn't hold up as well as you would hope.
It's interesting because I had read that Cameron believes that it delivers more each time that you watch it.
I'm going to tell you, I've done a lot of research for this episode, and Cameron believes a lot of things. I like that we're calling him Cameron.
Cameron. Yeah,
First
I'm sorry.
name.
This is two Camerons.
Super casual.
This is Crowe. I'm so sorry. That's
Cameron
hilarious.
Diaz.
My buddy Cam.
Cameron Diaz was consistently referred to on set as CD just to differentiate her, because they spent the first week when anytime someone said her name, she would turn around because she's used to, as she says, being the only Cameron on set.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Let's very quickly do the timeline here. Jerry Maguire is a huge hit in 1996. It earns Cruise his second acting nomination from the Academy. It earns Crowe his first nomination for Best Original Screenplay. He then takes all of that momentum and puts it into the year 2000's Almost Famous, the semi-fictionalized version of his own experiences as a very young reporter working for Rolling Stone magazine. That is a major break for Kate Hudson, of course, and it wins Crowe, of course, that Original Screenplay Academy Award that he had so long sought. Almost Famous loses money, mostly because of its wild $60 million budget, but it is very well regarded by critics. Roger Ebert names it the best film of the year 2000. So Crowe is once again hot. Meanwhile, Cruz Wagner Productions have optioned Alejandro Amenabar's 1997 Spanish-language movie Abre los Ojos. Would you like to say that better than I can possibly say that?
Abre los ojos.
Exactly right. The movie has aired at Sundance in 1998 and is a hot property. So Cruz and Wagner specifically buy it. They buy the option to offer it to Cameron Crowe, who's already at that point in development for Almost Famous, while Cruz is shooting Eyes Wide Shut. They come together, it's a match, they're all very excited about the idea of recreating this film in the English language, and it turns into this weird film. And it is weird. It's kind of weird down to its DNA, not just because of like the shared names. We have Tom Cruise opposite Penelope Cruz, who campaigns for this role because she also plays Sophia in the Spanish language version of the film. Yeah. She is born in 1974 in Spain. She studies ballet as a child, taking 9 years at Spain's National Conservatory and another 7 years of ballet and theater at the school of famed Argentinian playwright and actress and director Cristina Rota. She gets television work at the age of 15, then makes her first film in 1992 at the age of 17, Jamón the Jamón, with Javier Bardem, in which she is semi-controversially topless at the age of 17. She will then weirdly marry Bardem in the year 2010. In 1994, Cruz moves to New York to continue her studies of ballet and to learn English while continuing to make Spanish and Italian films. In 1997, she appears in Pedro Almodóvar's Live Flesh, which starts a long-term professional relationship with Almodóvar, and that's the same year where she appears in Abre los Ojos, where she originates the role of Sophia. When she finds out that the movie has been optioned, when she finds out that it has gone to Cameron Crowe, she goes after him with a will. She goes after him, telling him that she needs to be cast in the film.
I do think she's wonderful.
I think she's absolutely wonderful. Yeah. She goes on to have an excellent kind of career, honestly, because she bounces from indie work to big Hollywood movies and survives unscathed the kinds of disasters that have ruined the careers of lesser women. She is in Gothica with Halle Berry and Robert Downey Jr., which is a titanic failure.
Never even
She's
heard of
in
it, I don't
Sahara with Matthew McConaughey,
heard of
a very famous bomb. She is in Sex and the City too with that host of Damned Souls.
Oh my God.
But she's also quietly brilliant in Murder on the Orient Express, which is otherwise not very good. She gives by far the most interesting performance in Michael Mann's 2023 movie Ferrari.
Agreed.
An outstanding performance, I think. What do you think of Cruz? What do you think of her in general? What do you think of her in this film?
I think that she's just so luminous in this film. She's lovely and playful in a way that I really like. I do like the dialogue that she gets. I love that scene when they're in the club and she says, "I'll see you in another life when we are both cats." And he's like, "See, this is why I love you, because you say things like that." And I kind of get it. I'm like, yeah, I would also have a big crush, I think. I do maybe have a big crush.
I think there's something really interesting about Penelope Cruz and about Jason Lee in this film, in that they can handle the Crowe dialogue better than the other characters because they are protected by the bulletproof defense of English not being the first language in one case and just being a snide douchebag in the other. Like, there's not supposed to be any sincerity. There's not supposed to be any sentimentality about Jason Lee. He just delivers, well, he delivers the Jason Lee performance, right? How familiar are you with him before we get to Vanilla Sky?
I think not at all.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Didn't he have a TV show he had My Name is Earl.
He did, but not until after this.
See, then that's basically everything I know about him.
Yeah, he's born in 1970 in Santa Ana. He grows up in Huntington Beach, and he falls in love early with skateboarding, dropping out of high school to become a professional skateboarder.
Right, because he's also the person that the Chris Evans character is based on.
You're citing Scott Pilgrim. My work here is done.
Wow.
Excellent. Yes, Lucas Lee from Scott Pilgrim is Jason Lee. Yeah.
So weird.
So he goes professional as a skateboarder in 1988. He appears in a couple music videos in the very early 90s and then just becomes friends with Kevin Smith. He is cast in Mallrats, his very first acting role, in 1995. He's in Chasing Amy in 97, Dogma in 99, and then he's cast by Cameron Crowe in Almost Famous. So he kind of joins what Crowe is thinking of at this point in his career as a repertory company.
Oh.
Crowe's career is not going to work out like that. He's not going to have much more of a filmography, unfortunately, after this film.
Is it unfortunate after this film? We'll see.
This is not the one that kills him.
This isn't though. It's true. It's true. Yeah, Elizabethtown I have avoided so far, but maybe I need to just for, a history lesson.
Jason Lee will continue working with Kevin Smith in the years after Vanilla Sky. In 2004, of course, he will play the villain in Brad Bird's The Incredibles. Then in 2005, he's cast as the lead in Greg Garcia's NBC sitcom My Name is Earl. They do 96 episodes of that show, which seems wild. In 2007, he will be cast as Dave in the, and I give this number very seriously and very exactly, $1.2 billion franchise, Alvin and the Chipmunks.
Oh, yeah.
Those 4 films, $1.2 billion in total.
Wow.
So if you wonder why Jason Lee isn't so much with the acting anymore and is more with owning a skate shop and doing photography and just kind of hanging out, it's because the man never needs to work again.
Wow, nice.
What's perhaps most interesting about Jason Lee in the context of this film, and certainly in the context of his public persona around the time that this film came out, was that he was a noted Scientologist. The same year that Vanilla Sky comes out, he divorces his first wife, and this is not a joke either, because he learned that she had read A Piece of Blue Sky, an anti-Scientology book. He then immediately divorces her. He goes on to date Beth Riesgraff, who plays Parker in Leverage.
Nope.
I don't know if that's ringing a bell for you. Just a cute little bit of information, I thought. Then in 2016, he announces he is not a Scientologist any longer. He announces in 2016, in fact, that he hasn't been a Scientologist for years.
Oh.
He's one of the very few people who has very quietly left that particular church.
Wow, that's hard to do.
Is Chris Evans' performance as Lucas Lee in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World the best performance that we've seen from Chris Evans to date?
I mean, it's fantastic, but I don't see Jason Lee there. He's doing something very different from Jason Lee.
I think it's more he is being the guy that Jason Lee thinks that he is.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Although, by all accounts, he mellowed into a much more reasonable and chill person.
Yeah.
He certainly had an edge about him in his younger years. Yeah. Is he an odd choice for the best friend character opposite Tom Cruise?
Well, I mean, are they really best friends?
Well, I mean, is anything really anything? I mean, that's the problem.
I just mean to say they obviously have a pretty toxic relationship, or maybe not toxic isn't the right word. They have a very selfish relationship, a very, not even codependent, but they just each want something from the other.
But I think that we're supposed to see that. We're supposed to see that transition occurring at the beginning of the film as it's presented, right? That it is Sophia that poisons the water between them.
Oh, absolutely not.
I don't buy it either, but that seems to be the film's assertion. But it is, I was just talking about how weird it is to think of Tom Cruise hanging out with Cameron Crowe and watching a movie. It's kind of weird to think about Tom Cruise being friends with someone.
I guess.
Has it been since Top Gun that he's had a really convincing male relationship in one of his movies? Because all of the other relationships that we get are very much hierarchical, right?
Yeah.
He is the leader of the IMF, right? He is in charge of his team. So the relationships can be close and they can be emotionally charged and they can certainly be respectful, but they're not a relationship between two peers. And that's certainly how this is presented, at least.
Yeah, I guess he's often doing this leading man, kind of an island unto himself thing.
Yeah.
So this is very different from that.
Which kind of comes with the territory of the classic Tom Cruise vehicle, where an independent man asserts his will upon the world and is ultimately proved right, but only after alienating everyone.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little about Cameron Diaz, shall we? She's born in 1972 in San Diego. She grows up in Long Beach. She attends the Long Beach Polytechnic High School, where she is in the grade below Snoop Dogg.
Wow.
They have both talked
publicly
world. About their awareness of each other while they were both at school, where apparently she was Cameron Diaz and he was Snoop Dogg already.
Just already there, yeah.
Fully formed right out of the gate. She begins modeling at the age of 16 and is immediately very successful. When she's 21, she auditions for the Jim Carrey movie The Mask, despite having never acted before. She takes acting classes frantically in the run-up to that film. It is, of course, a huge success. She establishes a pretty good run of mid-90s movies, including My Best Friend's Wedding and what Wikipedia scathingly describes as the little scene movie A Life Less Ordinary, end quote, which is just awful. She then shifts gears again when she's cast as the lead in There's Something About Mary, of course, setting a whole new tone there. She does Charlie's Angels in the year 2000. And in 2001, the same year as Vanilla Sky, she will appear in the Adam Brooks movie The Invisible Circus with Jordana Brewster and Christopher Eccleston and, Shrek.
Oh, Shrek. Yeah, of course.
Yes.
That's a good paycheck for her.
A very good. I can only hope. I can only hope that people made money off of that movie. We'll return to Diaz, of course, in 9 weeks' time for the much less successful than Vanilla Sky, and that is saying something night and day. Because obviously you look at this film and what you see is incredible sexual chemistry between Cameron Diaz and Tom Cruise, right? I am not the world's biggest fan of Cameron Diaz. I don't think that, in general, she is very good.
I think that she's cute and funny sometimes, but I would agree that I don't necessarily think that she's very good.
I really resent what they made her do in this film.
Oh, yeah.
It is beyond a thankless task.
Yeah.
It is an immediate descent into self-parody with nothing to support her at all. It's a really rough gig.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a pretty paper-thin character.
Yeah.
She's just crazy.
And just gets crazier.
And just gets crazier. Yeah.
And when we're talking about Cameron Crowe's dialogue, she, I think, probably gets the worst of it. Well, she doesn't get my absolute least favorite line in the entire script.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
But she does get the bulk of the rest of the drags, right?
Yeah,
it's
basically
a lot of really
everything in the car right before she drives off that bridge is just awful.
It's one of the worst scenes I've ever seen in a film. It's so shockingly terrible.
It really is
and
terrible.
so completely unmotivated.
And juvenile. Yeah, it's not great.
Let's talk about the person who gets to say my least favorite line in this entire film. Let's talk about Mr. Kurt Russell, shall we? Kurt Russell was born in 1951 in Springfield, Massachusetts. He's the son of actor Bing Russell. He begins acting basically the moment he springs forth into the world. He signs a 10-year contract with Disney, becoming their most reliable star of the 1970s. He makes more money for Disney in the 70s than anyone. And he's basically terrific in all of those films. He's just so charming. He then transitions into his adult career. He falls in with James Cameron. He makes Escape from New York and The Thing and Big Trouble in Little China and Escape from LA. He makes 3 movies with Goldie Hawn, of course. The two have been in a romantic relationship since 1983. That's 41 years, you guys.
Cheers.
He's in Tombstone and Stargate and is undeniably the best thing about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2.
Sure,
Delivers a real performance in a film that does not justify or demand a real performance. He's been in a surprising number of Fast and Furious movies, which I have never seen. And he's Santa Claus. What more do you need?
Oh, that's right. Sexy Santa Claus with Goldie Hawn. Yeah.
Is he the best thing about Vanilla Sky? I
think Penelope Cruz might be the best thing about it.
Gregory Peck performance.
Yeah. No, he's lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. He's really wonderful. And I like the relationship that they have together. And I like that it's, a figment of David's imagination. I like that he...
Or is it? Who can say?
We can't just keep saying that.
Everything you say about this film can be tagged with, or is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. That's true. That's true. It's a little sloppy.
Russell meets Crowe on the set of Almost Famous, of course, when he stops by one day just to see Kate Hudson. And the two apparently hit it off very successfully. So he was brought back immediately for this film.
Perfect.
Lastly, we absolutely positively have to talk about Tilda Swinton because she is spectacular in this film in a one-scene turn, which I just think does a lot to anchor the very implausible scenario that we're presented with at the end of this film.
Silly. Yeah.
So she's born in 1960 in London. She attends Cambridge University. She joins the Royal Shakespeare Company immediately thereafter. She works simultaneously on stage, on television, and in film through the 1980s. She gets the lead in Orlando, the adaptation of the Virginia Woolf novel in 1992, which immediately, brings to light her desire to play with gender and the presentation of gender. She appears in Danny Boyle's The Beach in the year 2000, then in Vanilla Sky. She's the lead in The Deep End also in 2001. In 2005, she'll be Jadis, the White Witch. She will be an absolute icon in that film. Just an astonishing powerhouse performance. In 2008, she'll appear in Benjamin Button. 2012, she'll begin her long-running collaboration with Wes Anderson, appearing first in Moonrise Kingdom. In 2016, she'll do her time in the Marvel mine with Doctor Strange.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2022, she appears in George Miller's 3,000 Years of Longing with Idris Elba, which you have seen and I haven't, but I really, really want to. How is she in 3,000 Years of Longing?
She's incredible. She's really, really great in it. Yeah, it's a strange movie. I'm not sure that Idris Elba is good. But
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I want him to be.
Generally a little cooler on Idris Elba than most everyone, which means that I think he's an excellent actor and not necessarily the voice of a generation.
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
This is the movie that is set almost entirely in a hotel room because she is an archaeologist who finds a genie.
Yep.
That genie is Idris Elba.
Yes. Yeah, basically.
That's pretty good.
Yep.
Yeah, that's quite the meet cute for a rom-com, let me tell you. So the shooting for Vanilla Sky, it's just really straightforward, which you would expect it to be, I suppose, having, all of this source material that you're drawing from very directly and the long-term logistical power of Cameron Crowe and, of course, Cruise Wagner Productions behind it. They shoot for only 6 weeks, mostly in New York. They do a couple of interior pickups in LA. There's a whole story about how they shoot the Times Square sequence, which is basically they block off 10 streets of Manhattan at like 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and they know that when the sun comes up, they have 20 minutes to shoot this entire sequence.
And just go. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Wow. That's so really cool. It's a great sequence.
I think so too. And so much of the opening aerial cinematography of New York is so striking and fresh and interesting. And of course,
it's a beautiful movie.
We have to talk about, where this falls in history. All art is created in linear time, as I've said many times before. This film is shot before 9/11 and is released 2 months afterwards, and carries with it, I think, some of that sense of New York as an unreal place, a sense of New York as a vanished place. Certainly the intent in the opening sequence as we race through the empty streets and then finally wind up in the abandoned Times Square. Yeah. The intent there is not to evoke the imagery, the iconography of 9/11, but that is an inescapable consequence when the film is finally released. It gives the entire film, I think, a slightly different cast, a slightly different suggestion.
Yeah, I suppose it would. Because I did like that sense of dread when he comes out in the Ferrari and he looks both ways and there's no traffic. Looks both ways and there's no traffic. It's just very interesting.
The way that builds through that opening sequence, just as he's driving, we get that gorgeous shot as he's coming along, the east side of Central Park?
Yes.
Which is exactly the same few blocks that we keep seeing in films because of a brilliant tracking shot in Sleeping with the Other People. Is that the film?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
We did that fantastic tracking shot on Jason Sudeikis coming down those blocks. So now every time those blocks appear in a film, and they do frequently, I'm always reminded of that particular sequence. Yeah, that it's really eerie. It's really otherworldly. I absolutely adore it.
I would be getting anxious too.
Yeah, there's a lot of tonal power right there at the beginning of the film. Vanilla Sky is released on December 14th, 2001. It goes in at number 1 at the box office with an opening weekend of $25 million, displacing the previous week's number 1 film, Ocean's 11.
Wow.
Which is now in its second week. That is wow.
That's impressive.
What a time to be alive.
Yeah.
Also opening this week are Not Another Teen Movie at number 3 and The Royal Tenenbaums all the way down at number 15.
I saw a lot of these in theaters.
A lot of way to go.
That's cool. I was lucky because right here in this point of my life, a lot of my friends worked at the movie theater. So I got to go see movies for free basically throughout my high school career, which was awesome.
Did you go and see in its 5th week at number 4 at the box office, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone?
I sure did. You better believe it. With my little Birdie Bots Every Flavor beans, I was so excited.
That movie has already made $253 million by its 5th week. Monsters, Inc. is in its 7th week at number 6 at the box office. Amelie, charmingly, is in its 7th week at number 10 at the box office.
That's wonderful.
What a plethora of films. What a variety of films.
I miss variety in films.
Vanilla Sky would go on to make $203 million internationally off of a budget of $68 million, though the critical response is extremely mixed. Ebert liked it. He gave it 3 stars out of 4, describing it strangely as a, quote, scrupulously moral picture.
Yeah. Which
I don't understand. I really don't see an applied morality, an applied sense of morality in this film, but we can maybe talk about that as we move through.
It feels very morally conservative to me.
Really? In what way?
Well, it's
apart from rejecting the idea of the fuck buddy.
Yes, it rejects that idea. It's so essentialist about monogamy. And
Definitely, yeah.
also about this idea of like a bro code.
Interesting.
Yeah, like he ought not to have slept with either Julia or Sophia because his friend liked them first or whatever. Like that like paints him in a morally bad light. And he gets straight up judged by the tech support guy in the end, who's like, why are you obsessing over this woman? Like, maybe let it go, dude. You know?
I think that's a possible read of his relationship with Jason Lee. I think it's certainly a possible read of what we get from the God figure right at the end of the movie, for sure. Yeah. But you're right. Maybe there's something about its sentimentality vis-a-vis those romantic moments, right? About what a romantic moment can mean to you as a person. That is, I think you're right, probably pretty conservatively aligned in terms of its morality, yeah, in terms of its sense of who people are and how they ought to interact. It is nominated only for Best Original Song at the Oscars for this just unexceptionally terrible Paul McCartney song. Like, I went into it expecting not to like it at all, and I don't like it at all.
That was a new song?
But it's just kind of fun. It's called Vanilla Sky.
Yeah, yes. Of course.
And it's just kind of fine. I don't even have, I can't summon the anima to really come out against it. It's just fine.
I mostly quite like the soundtrack. I listened to the soundtrack after I watched the movie because there was a lot of it that kind of stuck with me, and it was just a vibe. It was a mood.
There's a lot of good stuff. That's what you get from Cameron Crowe.
Yeah. So that does kind of surprise me that first of all, that it was created for the film, because it doesn't stand out as like new in the way. There were so many things in the film, or so many songs on the soundtrack, I should say, that sounded so particular to like my lived 2001 experience, that it just surprised me, I guess, that the one that would be made for the film just sounded like a vague. It could have been made anytime between 1970 and
because it is made for the film, but it's made for the film by Paul McCartney.
Yeah,
and you can't escape your roots that. You know,
you're just who you are. Interesting.
I found the most surprising thing about the soundtrack to be the clash of what I think of as fundamentally 90s music and what I think of as fundamentally 2000s era music. It feels like there's a lot of crossover there. Yeah. The Joan Osborne in particular feels and is anachronistic, but feels very anachronistic.
It does. Yeah. That's cool, though. I love the Radiohead in the beginning.
Yeah.
Or at least the opening of it, because I listened to the whole song. And by the end, I was like, no, I don't like Radiohead.
7 minutes of the same thing. Yeah.
But it's a great opening. So moody.
Stephanie Zacharek at Salon described the film as, quote, an aggressively plotted puzzle picture which clutches many allegedly deep themes to its heaving bosom without uncovering even an onion skin layer of insight into any of them, end quote. And
that is scathing but accurate.
Isn't that
I
brilliant?
Completely agree.
Yes.
Nailed
and then, just to top herself, adds this, quote, who would have thought that Cameron Crowe had a movie as bad as Vanilla Sky in him, end quote. Cameron Crowe's next film will be 2005's Elizabethtown. As of today, his last film is 2015's Aloha. It is hard to think of any director that has tanked the reputation. Yeah. And I know we talked about this when we talked about Jerry Maguire, but it remains an inexplicable conundrum. Yeah. What happened to Cameron Crowe is matched maybe only by what happened to Robert Zemeckis.
Yeah.
To fall from such a height is extraordinary. I'm not wild about Almost Famous. I mean, Jerry Maguire is a cast iron picture. That is a rock solid picture.
I basically haven't seen Almost Famous. So
I would really like
to
return to it with you. I think I would like to see what Crowe's magic is like when it is working again. It feels like forever since we've seen Jerry Maguire. Even though we haven't. I should mention that between Elizabethtown and Aloha is We Bought a Zoo, but that is a...
Oh, that's right. I'm always going to be surprised.
Because that is not as much a Cameron Crowe picture. That is basically a work for hire to try and rehabilitate himself 6 years after Elizabethtown. Elizabethtown is such a failure that it kills his career stone dead for 6 years.
I think it also has female problems. I think that the Scarlett Johansson character is maybe underdeveloped, but I could be wrong. And maybe I'm just remembering it incorrectly.
Far too young for Matt Damon in that film.
Way too young for Matt Damon. But I don't. Are they romantic? I don't think
there is a
romantic.
kiss at the end.
Oh,
but
okay.
I don't know if that is representative of a relationship that will go further.
Yeah, but I don't really remember, I guess. I remember other parts of it. But
what's so interesting, I think, about this film is seeing everything that will be wrong with Elizabethtown in miniature and in this the prototypical form, right? We've almost got it. Like, Sophia is so almost a manic pixie dream girl. And the loopholes that let you get around that is that she's also imaginary.
Right. Yeah. Imaginary Sophia is absolutely a manic pixie dream girl. Yeah. But I think real life Sophia was awesome. I loved her too.
If we can assume...
If that was my first date, I would still be obsessing a little bit too.
Yeah. Really, this is the thing about the film. It's very structured, right? The nature of this story kind of lets you like as much as you want of this film. Because if there's anything you don't like, you can just say, oh, but that's not really real. That didn't really happen. That's all in his head. That version of that character is never real, right?
Yeah.
Is Kurt Russell real at all? Is Jason Lee real at all? Are any of the other characters real at all? Where do you draw the dividing line between reality and this suspended fiction?
Yeah, which makes me wish that they didn't work to like somehow resolve this plot. Like I almost wish that, well, and of course it would have to be made by somebody else, but that it was just stranger and unresolved. Like...
the David Lynch
Lynchian,
version
I guess.
of it. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I think in essence, that is why watching the film for the first time feels so powerful.
And feels good, I think, most of the time. It's interesting, it's intriguing, certainly suspenseful, strange,
because you're
a vibe.
Watching an entire world unravel.
Yeah.
You don't know where the lines are. You don't know what the limits are. It's impossible to really speculate about the nature of reality under the experience of David Ames. But when you watch it again and you know what the trick is, you can... I think feel less secure in that dissolution of the world, which is sometimes I think very cinematically effective. Sorry, go on.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say that I did have, I think, a growing sense of dread as the film neared its end, as I was like, they're not going to be able to land this. They just can't.
Yeah. With all that said, then, let's give a quick gloss of the structure. I think if we talk about each act, because the act structure is pretty tight, we talk about each act in turn, and we can just kind of delve into what catches your eye and what takes your fancy as we move through this film. So we open with David Ames, who has inherited a magazine company that is somehow still profitable, even in the year 2001. He wakes to a dream of an empty city, then wakes again, and everything seems normal, but we cut out from his everyday life to a sequence in which he is wearing a mask and protesting his innocence to Kurt Russell, talking about a murder. Back in the normal world, he meets Sophia at his birthday party, the last semi-guileless girl in New York, this proto-manic pixie dream girl. David navigates this new relationship with Sophia and the toxic damage of his relationship with Julie, which ultimately results in a terrible car crash following the worst scene in the history of film. That's our first act. The car crash is amazing.
Yeah. That's a really
upsetting
car crash. The feeling of being in the car as she is driving faster and faster and more out of control. It's really quite suspenseful.
The restraint of locking the camera off, showing the impact, and then holding on it for 8-10 seconds.
Yeah, while people are like running to the car.
People running in the background. It's so powerful. It's such a statement. It's a valuable reminder in a film, particularly like this, that Cameron Crowe can really deliver an emotional impact to the viewer when he wants to.
Yeah, I would agree.
So let's rewind to the beginning of the film. We talked a little about that opening dream sequence on the empty streets of New York and how
opening sequence is awesome,
upsetting and brilliant it is.
Really great, really brilliant, really beautifully done. Excellent Tom Cruise run.
Oh yeah,
that's excellent running.
Brilliantly starts out as not an excellent Tom Cruise run, right? As he's nervous and he's just kind of jogging, and it doesn't feel quite like Cruise, and then all at once he's in it. It's a burst of speed, and it's robotic at this point. Good. It's just spectacular, And that sequence all through Times Square with all of the various, depending on how you interpret this film, possible Easter eggs, references, allusions, allegorical keys to understanding the significance of the film. You know, we've got a Twilight Zone episode being shown on one of the big screens. It's, you know, there's a complexity there. There's a pop cultural, literary kind of desire to knit together everything that we have ever seen and heard and experienced all in one thing, all in one place. That, I think, is just terrific, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. And I think showing us his apartment and the Radiohead song is all great.
Yep.
I love that apartment. It's beautiful.
It is a great apartment. This is the thing. This film's budget, $68 million. It's not a film that demands a particularly high budget, like just looking at the script on the page. But showing wealth is extremely expensive in real life. So that's probably why that number is as high as it is. So then we're introduced to Julie. We're introduced to this casual relationship that they have cultivated, I guess, repeatedly. Like this is a very comfortable scenario that we're coming into, which makes
for him anyway.
Well, I don't know how to read her in this film. I really don't. It feels like we established something very confidently in this opening scene and that it is true and authentic. But that makes the betrayal of that so much harder to swallow later in the film, where suddenly she's just crazy. Suddenly she's just like...
I think she was giving me crazy pretty
She's
early
giving you
on.
crazy early on.
She was giving me crazy pretty much from the jump. Yeah.
Sure.
Because I think I had forgotten that she was nuts. And then as I was watching, I was like, oh,
You're thinking, wow.
this is...
Diaz is giving a lot in this.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm getting red flags for sure. But I think red flags also for him for being like an emotionally unavailable douchebag.
Yes. I mean, that is a character arc that can be distilled out of this film if you're inclined to do so. You can certainly look at this as being one man's journey through the fire, right? He gets this emotional crucible into which he is placed, and that kind of purifies him. He stops treating people as fungible. He stops exploiting the people around him, but he's never that bad at the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
I actually really like Cruz at the beginning of the film. I really love the intensity of that empty New York opening sequence. But even when he is himself in the quote unquote real world, he's playful. He's light on his feet. It's a little bit young. It's a little bit boyish, and we haven't done boyish from Cruz in a while, right? He's always got it about him, I suppose, just because of the way he looks during this period of his career. But we've done a lot of like intensity from Cruz over the last few films. And it's nice to see some of that. It's almost back to like The Firm, right? Because he's not ever really that boyish in Jerry Maguire. It's not quite that same. I'm just playing and I'm having fun without consequence. It kind of takes me back to an earlier phase.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
I enjoy, yeah. What do you think of that first jarring cutout to the prison and to the mask and to Kurt Russell? And
I think it's cool. I wish that it made more sense. Like, ultimately, those are where my biggest questions are. Like, all the Kurt Russell stuff and him being in prison, and like that's where it doesn't make sense anymore. Also, Kurt Russell keeps on asking, who is Ellie?
L.E. It's
who is
life
L-E?
extension? Yeah.
Life extension.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Well, that's one mystery solved.
It is clarified in literally one shot where we get the letters L.E. reflected with life extension underneath it. That's all that we get, though. Yeah.
Dumb. All right. Sure.
It is pretty dumb.
Yeah,
honestly.
that's frustrating.
Yeah.
Oh, well. It could have just been the name of... I was ready for it to be the name of Tilda Swinton, and then it wasn't. I was like, well, then what are we doing?
That would have been neater. Or the name of Alicia Witt, who also shows up brilliantly.
Yeah, and he says her name is Libby.
I love Alicia Witt.
She's great.
In everything. She's so terrific in this film.
She's always good.
Yeah.
Agreed.
What do you make of Cruz's intensity during those sequences? Because for all that he's light on his feet as David at the beginning of the film, masked Cruz is giving us something very, very intense. He's giving us the raw
upsetting.
stuff there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it compelling for you?
Compelling.
Are you're caught up in it?
Yes, it's compelling for me, but it also feels too far away from the last David that we get before he jumps off the wall.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that man is not ready to re-enter society, actually. And maybe you ought to hold him back for a little bit and give him actual therapy and then send him out. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I think that is, in a sense, the problem with the read of the film that is presented to us, right? Because in a way, we were just criticizing, or not even criticizing, but commenting upon Cameron Crowe's sentimentality, right? Can the beacon of love on the horizon sustain a man through an unknown eternity? Yes, of course it can. But ultimately, of course, it can't.
Right.
Ultimately, it falls apart, and he chooses not to stay here with the memory of one perfect night and this fantasy of what would follow thereafter, but to return to the real world. And the film certainly seems to intend that to be our reading of the final moments of the movie.
yeah.
But that guy is not fit.
No, he's
to
not
move
ready.
forward.
Yeah.
Although, maybe he is. Maybe we can see something, right? If Kurt Russell, if Dr. McCabe is genuinely fictional, which he certainly seems to be, if everything that he is experiencing is a facet of his own mind, let's remember that he is in prison about to be put on trial for his own death, for his own murder, the murder of himself, right?
What?
The reason that David is in prison, the murder with which he has been charged, is his own death. It is his own suicide. That psychologically is what is being manifested. No?
I don't know. I just thought it was Sophia.
When he's with the tech support right at the end of the movie, I'm making a hash of moving through this film with any kind of
that's okay. I think we ought not.
Sequentialism.
So that's okay.
When he's in the elevator at the end, when we get that huge exposition scene, he says, there was a murder. It was me.
Right.
I don't think that he actually killed Sophia. And I mean, by that point, Sophia is not real anyway, right? This is all just happening in his brain. If we are, again,
I hear what you're... Yeah. Now I remember and I hear what you're saying.
There are other ways of analyzing this. There are end-arounds that let us change what the film is depicting. But reading the film's intent as clearly and as unambiguously as possible.
The psychological trial in his brain for which he has needed a doctor to help him through it.
A doctor, a father, right?
Father doctor, yes. A father figure, yes, is him coming to terms with his own suicide. Get it. Okay. Yeah. I think I like that, in fact.
And with philosophically, right? The rejection of real life because he has been clinging to something that is not real.
Yes.
Which is...
I like that.
It's kind of secluded. It's kind of difficult to parse. But if that is what Crowe is saying in this film, that actually we ought to live. Actually, we ought to put away these shibboleths of sentimentality and of romance and of, by extension, pop culture too, right? Because this is so tied in with listen to your favorite song, have this moment, have this poster, have this guitar, like whatever it is. If we're supposed to set all of that aside so that we can really live,
yes,
that's a great philosophy. That is a great point that the film is making, if indeed that is the point that the film is making. And it makes the turn to Elizabethtown all the more inexplicable.
Just so tragic. Yeah.
I just don't know how we get from here to there if that's what we're doing.
Yeah. This is interesting. I find Cameron Crowe's whole deal just interesting.
What do we think of the introduction of Sophia at the party? Let's talk just a little, because I guess this is just going to be a recurring beat and we're never going to have a more satisfying chance to really talk about it. Let's talk about the ownership of women, shall we?
Oh, God. Yeah. I mean, huge problem in the movie. Huge.
As much as the film is constantly protesting that that's not what it's doing, as much as both men are saying, oh, no, but it's not really like that. Oh, hey, it's not really going to be like that. That's absolutely what it is.
Yeah, no, that's completely
You met this girl,
yeah.
so now she belongs to you, and you're mad that your buddy has taken her. It's gross.
It's totally gross. Yeah, it's horrible. Yeah, and the same thing with Julia. With I thought she was perfect. She was the girl or whatever.
Right, and that's all the worse because
dream girl. That's what he says.
Taken his dream girl and turned her into a disposable relationship. Turned her into something that is not even being fully romantically realized. Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah, kind of gross.
Yeah, really gross. Really terrible. Yeah.
Let's talk though about Penelope Cruz. Let's talk about her showing up in this movie.
Oh my God! The way they light her, the way they dress her, the way her bangs are like theater curtains for her face. Shut the front door. I love everything about it. She's incredible. Wow.
She really is. Yeah. And I think she makes such a powerful impression through this first sequence.
Absolutely, she does.
Being so playful. Being particularly, I suppose it's the second sequence, right? It's after he comes back from being with Julie in the bedroom.
Right.
And he goes to her and says, you've got to help me out because this woman is stalking me. While I hate the depiction of this woman who is in a relationship with me, with whom I have entered into mutually a relationship, right? I have given this woman every reason to believe that I am in some way, at least, committed to her. That line that she gets later about she wasn't even invited to the birthday party.
Yeah.
I mean, she has a point, is the thing. Anyway, to set all of that aside, she's just presented as a banshee, right?
Yeah.
Okay, she's just a harridan here. But that scene with Penelope Cruz, I think, with Sophia is
the saddest
really...
girl to ever hold a martini.
What do you think of that?
I think it's great.
That did make my list specifically of the worst lines in this film.
It did.
Let me double check here in my notes.
The thing I didn't like is that they brought it up like 3 or 4 times. Like, aren't I brilliant for having written this line? And just stop that. Let it go.
Self-satisfied.
That's the problem. I think if we had just thrown it away, I would love it.
But I was talking earlier about how you can find ways within the structure of this film to justify any decision that you don't like. Here's the thing. Maybe they're just subliminal echoes. Maybe it's not supposed to be recognized as a screenwriter being very pleased with himself. Rather, it's a totemic line that is unusual enough that it's echoing through his memory. I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know.
Sure.
The only other Sophia line that I have written down in my list of lines that I really don't like is, but I just think good things will happen if you're a good person with a good attitude. Don't you think? Blinkety blink blink, blink blink. Shockingly bad. But Cruz is great.
Cruz is great. Yeah. Penelope, that is.
Yes. So we move through their first night together, which I find implausible. I had to really sit down and plot out the timeline of this movie to figure out that this is all supposed to be on one night for real. But okay, we move through their one night, this perfect magical night, this delayed gratification too, right? Like he's putting off the inevitability of this relationship because he enjoys that moment of release. He's edging himself romantically with Penelope Cruz, which is so strange. A pleasure delay, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, just...
But they kiss, so it's not really whatever.
It's that moment, yes, but he doesn't specifically sleep with her that night because presumably had he slept with her, then the bloom would have been off the rose. She would have been sullied by a man, even if only by himself. And then she wouldn't have been this pure symbol. She wouldn't have been the manic pixie dream girl that he could have held on to for 150 years of dreamful sleep, I guess. Is there anything that could be done, do you think, to salvage the scene between Cruz and Diaz in the car? Is there anything about that scene that works for you? Is there anything that you think you really had something there for a minute and then you lost it. I will say this in his defense. I think that Cruz does a great job of not playing the reality of the scene at the beginning of the scene, of like laughing her off.
Yes.
Like, you can't be serious. Don't be ridiculous. This is nonsense. That I think really works.
I think that does work.
Everything else, the worst.
I think I like her trying to play her CD and her music. And like, I would listen to me, or I would buy this CD if I didn't make it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, she's actually on the official soundtrack.
That's one of she is, and a song that's kind of works. Like it's okay.
And the song that is credited to the character name, which I really like.
Love that.
That's a nice Cameron Crowe touch. Right
love
there.
that.
Yeah.
So good.
And it does sound pretty good.
It sounds pretty good. Yep. Yeah. But the lyrics are also crazy.
Yes.
Yeah, which is kind of a nice little moment. I like that. I do. And I agree. Tom Cruise's like growing sense of oh shit as he is in that car is interesting and fun to watch. Leia, it's bad. Everything that they give her to say is terrible. It's
all this dialogue, I think, is near the bottom of the barrel for the whole film.
Especially because I think that you can make you can make her, you know, manic and a little bit insane and possessive and jealous.
Yeah.
Without also just being dumb. But they make her dumb in a way that I don't like.
Unsophisticated.
Right? Yeah.
The idea that she's leaning on this 1950s conceptualization of what sex is and what sex means, and the way that we are emphasizing four times means something is just
it doesn't make
garbage.
Any sense.
It's just awful.
It's silly.
Whereas I kind of like the equally overwritten but just a little more grounded stuff that we give her right at the beginning of that sequence when she pulls up in her car and she has that line about, how did it go with your moth girl? Did she turn into a butterfly for you? Mm-hmm. And like the lunacy of moths don't turn into butterflies. Yeah. Do you know that? But like, really, do you know that? Because you're giving me crazy. That I like, but yeah.
I like too that the film goes back to the moment before he gets in the car and notes that was like a real shitheel moment for him. Like the movie knows that, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. He is emotionally dishonest.
Yes.
He is a user of people.
Yep.
And that's...
And a manipulator.
Yeah, absolutely.
And will go on to manipulate Sophia in his dreams until he kills her.
Well, but yeah, again, you know, what does that even mean? What does it mean to manipulate someone that you're just dreaming about who isn't themselves real? Except we do, it seems, want to give a certain agency to this version of Sophia that is a figment of his imagination, which is so weird.
Like trying to wake him up to what he is doing. And it's all very interesting.
That's a really interesting question, actually. Is Sophia, as he understands her, trying to wake him up later in the film, or is that Julie, as he understands her, trying to wake him up in the rest of the film?
I think both. I hope, I don't want to give Cameron Crowe this much credit, but for me to enjoy the movie the most, I like to think about the reality of these women, his guilt over Julia, and Sophia's real loveliness. The first night that he met her, just like rising up above the fictional world he's trying to keep them in.
Yeah, yeah.
I see it as like those women refusing to be oppressed in this way, which I find interesting.
Yeah. And there might be something there too in the movement, the physical relocation from the apartment where the party is happening to his like private office apartment, his whole separate space that he has. There might be something there too.
Yeah, I fear though that, you know, since they're always saying open your eyes, or wake up or whatever, that does ultimately put them in service of David again, you know, snap out of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. But then we also do that with the male characters too.
We do it with Jason Lee too, so that's not so bad.
And with Timothy Spall, of course, that we haven't even mentioned so far.
We didn't mention Timothy Spall. I think he's great in this. This is maybe my favorite Timothy Spall I've ever seen.
He's so drunk at the beginning. It's such brilliant characterization. Yeah. And I'm certain that this is in the performances from both actors. This isn't just a thing that Timothy Spall is doing, but the way that he keeps like swaying forward to Cruz, and Cruz is like taking a half step back. So good.
It's really great.
Really fun to use a character actor like that in a film like this is just really bold choice. So that is our first act. The first act is punctuated by the car crash itself. And except for the excess of some of the dialogue, I'm in.
I think it's a great first act, actually. Yeah, I agree.
From there, though, we move into the first half of the second act, and though things are still strong, they start to get a little shakier. David tells Sophia that the crash in which Julie died and he was horribly injured was just a dream, only to realize that this is the dream. After the crash, the board members are trying to force him out of the company. His life has changed completely. His face has been completely transformed. He goes to meet with Sophia again long after the crash. They go to the club. We get the extended spot for Patron, who I can only assume paid multiple millions of dollars to have people say the name of their product so often in this film. And David unravels. It's a really tough sequence to watch. He runs through the streets. He drops to his knees. That's the midpoint of the film. That is our transit. Again, per the film's own internal narrative, that is our transition point from the real world into the dream world.
Yeah.
Though we might speculate about whether or not that is true. Let's talk a little about this makeup effect. I think it's brilliant.
Really, really good.
It's extremely disturbing. And it must have been tempting for them to dial it back and dial it back and dial it back to make it just more, the kind of conventional Hollywood disfigurement, right? It's a single scar that runs through his eye on the right side. But this is a really effective and complex piece of prosthetics, don't you think?
I do think so. And I think the way that it alters Tom Cruise's speech as well.
Yeah.
Because before we thought it was just because he was behind that mask. And then we see that the face underneath is so disfigured that that's why he's like struggling to articulate. So I think it's lovely. The not knowing which eye to look at and then both eyes being unsettling was really smart too.
I think also the masterstroke in this part of the film is not letting up on his characterization. The fact that he has been disfigured, right? And all of the, associations that we would have with that in the real world. Really what we're seeing is a man who is slipping into his own selfishness, like slipping further and further into his own self-regard and selfishness. And as the film presents to us several times over in several different ways, vanity, ?
Yes.
Do you read that from the film?
Yes and no. I mean, vanity is one thing, and just having a face that people will look at is another.
Sure, no, and I think that that's a completely defensible read of the film. The film itself seems to want us to believe that part of what he is going through here is a product of this compromised vanity, this compromised sense of self. I'm just not sure how I read that exactly, because Cruise's great skill on screen, it seems to me, is that he doesn't ever come across as vain despite inevitably being extremely vain. Right? He knows his angles. He knows how he looks good on screen, and he will manipulate a camera to get that. But that doesn't read as performative vanity in quite the same way. I don't know. It's difficult to tease that apart, I guess.
I think so.
Yeah. This is where we really start layering in what is dream and what is not. How do you...
Yeah, he wakes up from dreams too many times.
I was wondering.
It's too many.
Wondered if we went
Once
back to
or
that
twice,
well a few too many times.
Yeah. Once is good. Twice is maybe not playing fair. And more than that, then we find ourselves where we are now. We're like, well, is any of it really real anyway? And what does it matter? And you can't really pin anything down.
Well, which you say as a noted fan, an on-the-record fan of ambiguity in texts. The fact that this film seems to just be confused more than it seems to be presenting deliberate ambiguity, I think is a real problem. Yeah. The nightclub scene is harrowing.
I think it's so great. Isn't it good?
So difficult to watch. I mean, the mask we should talk about too. His mask upon a mask is just awful. It's just so painful to look at. Really inhuman and weird and just sculpted in all the worst ways.
Back of his head.
Putting it on the back of his head is so terrible. Particularly
so cool.
The way that they've got his hair kicked up so it looks like Tom Cruise's hair on the back of Tom Cruise's head is so weird and unearthly and unsettling.
And you can tell that it is a mask designed to look like Tom Cruise, not just any old mask. Oh.
Yes, but it looks just enough not like him to definitely fall into that uncanny valley. It's so weird. Such a strong choice. I think throughout, actually, the production design, we mentioned how rich everything looks. I think just beautiful.
Really
throughout.
inspiring production design.
The nightclub itself, though, this is, I start putting together the elements, right? I start thinking about the fracture points in the narrative for me about what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And obviously the falling asleep in the street, the passing out in the street, I guess I should say. And then the transition into the next morning and the way that the world now looks completely different. The lighting is completely different, all of that stuff. I get that that's a natural break point. It's a structural break point. That is the exact midpoint of the film. But then I start thinking about, you're really going to take this guy out to a nightclub? These people who we have not seen in a nightclub prior to this scene.
It does seem like a strange choice.
It does, doesn't it?
Except that I can see if she was nervous and was like, I don't really want to talk to him. He's like, that's fine. We'll go someplace loud. We'll all be there hanging out together, so it can't be weird.
Sure.
So I buy that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's a good explanation, actually. I like that. Yeah.
Thanks.
And I guess the only other thing that we should talk about in this part of the film is to raise a question, I suppose. Does any of the board stuff mean anything? Either within the fiction of the film or within the greater fiction of the film, right? Does it mean anything literally in David's life? Is Cameron Crowe making a satirical point about the magazine industry or about old money and new money or about how the elderly don't trust the young, right? That's a recurring beat, at least in his work. Is he really saying anything there, or are we only supposed to abstract away from this the board of directors, the board of doctors who are ultimately like monitoring David's condition in the last act of the film?
Yeah, I think it's mostly set dressing. I think it's mostly just pressure from all sides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's certainly how I read it too. And also, you know, it's kind of a hackneyed way of making a very wealthy young man in New York City feel like
he's somehow on the
a
back
victim,
foot,
right?
yeah,
Like,
which
oh,
is
poor
so
me.
not.
I'm
Yeah,
just being
exactly.
targeted by my dad's company's board. Yeah, it's not fantastic.
But again, sometimes it seems like the movie knows that, because when he sits in that chair and right in front of the board and he's late and he had the stupid hat and he's like gawky and awkward.
That
and I'm like,
bucket hat.
you look 12 years old. And then he says in the voiceover, they still look at me like I'm an 11-year-old kid.
Yeah.
But he delivered that. So
with the flashback to him scooting around the halls like it's...
So those are, I guess, some of the questions I have about the movie is like, to what extent does the screenwriting know that this guy's an asshole, and to what extent does it not? Like,
I think that it
you know?
does. I think that part of the film's intent is to give us that emotional transformation. Part of the film's intent is to make David reckon with the way that he treats women, by which I don't mean actual women. I mean like the essence of women, right?
Yes.
The way that women can be transformed into romance and good positive things in the world by the mind of Cameron Crowe, right? I think that it does force him to reckon that. So we do start off with him in a bad place, and we take him to what we're supposed to recognize as a good place. I think that's the film's intent.
The doorway to a good place.
But we can certainly talk about how we're supposed to interpret that, right? Yeah. One of the most interesting things I think about this film and the response to this film is the final moment, the final open your eyes. If you look online, you will find people all over the internet telling you that that is Penelope Cruz doing that voiceover, and that means something very specific in terms of their interpretation of the film. It is not Penelope Cruz.
Right? Isn't it like
it is a
Scottish actress?
Yes, it is a
something?
Scottish actress. Yes. And who is credited as the future, which I quite like, actually.
That's nice.
Right?
Yeah.
That makes me think that Cameron Crowe does know what he's doing, rejecting this luminous sentimentality and embracing, you know, the reality of the world, embracing its realness primarily. I kind of like that read. It makes me want to like the film more, but I don't feel safe enough with it. It's kind of a dysfunctional relationship.
Yeah,
at this
absolutely.
point.
Yeah, I am distrustful. Yes.
So we hit our midpoint. We come back. We have the vanilla sky. Everything is kind of candy colored. It all looks just lovely. Sophia finds him on the street and brings him inside. We go back to the interview with McCabe where he is sketching Sophia, and she is there even though she is not there, right? This is one of the moments when the film, for the first time, demonstrably breaks its own reality. We know that she is not in that room, and yet there she is, just cute as a button.
Yep.
Just being so adorable. Which I think is, again, really interesting, right? Because she is there, and she is cute as a button, which is his conception of her. This is tying back to this post-splice reality of Sophia, in which she is not at all real. Yeah. This is when we get the introduction of L.E. David remembers reconstructive surgery and being reunited with Sophia, but the dreams persist, and the reality of this fiction, this thing that is presented to us even within the story as a story, is kind of falling apart constantly. Yeah. We get the whole sequence with Julie, which is upsetting. Genuinely upsetting.
Yes.
He's arrested for assaulting her, even though she is now claiming to be Sophia. And this is when we introduce Noah Taylor, right? This is when he starts popping up constantly. This is the tech support figure. And
is
then,
that the actor's name or the character's name?
Noah Taylor is the actor's name.
Okay.
Yes, excuse me. Yeah.
That's okay.
He is credited with a name.
I think he has a name, but it's also tech support.
Edmund Ventura.
Edmund. I thought it was
Edmund
an Eddie or something.
Ventura,
Edmund
yes.
Ventura. That's
slash
cool. Sure.
tech support slash God ? Who knows? We get this carnival maelstrom of pop music and flashes of other scenes that culminate in the smothering of Sophia slash
We start to see
Julie.
that little clip of the real David committing suicide. That last time he looks in the mirror. That's always really upsetting when we see it.
It is, yeah. The tumble, the fall that he takes there too, which is a really great physical performance. I think I think that what Cruz is giving throughout this film is very good, and I think it is in the pursuit of not very much. I think that he is pretty consistently great in this film, even though it doesn't build to anything.
Yeah.
And I can see why he would be attracted by this film. I can see why he would want to deliver a performance like this, right? This feels maybe a little bit like he's in pursuit of some kind of statuary that he can put on his mantle. But because the film is so slight, or at least because the film refuses to deliver a real emotional catharsis, I think his performance is kind of swallowed up by the ambiguity a little bit.
Yeah.
It's difficult to read what is intentional and what is not, even in his performance. Would you agree with that?
I do agree. Yeah. So much of the movie feels like an accident, and you can't tell like what's a good accident and what's a bad one.
From there, in a sequence that makes no superficial sense, but does make a kind of metaphorical sense, he finally confesses his crime to McCabe, who then immediately takes him to LE, to Life Extension, which is where we get Alicia Witt, and then we get Tilda Swinton, and it's all extremely good. All of a sudden, the movie's really humming, it's crackling with this energy. And I really like both the implausibility of how this works within the fiction, and also how this metaphorically works, right? He is confronting the thing that has happened to him. He is confronting the choice that he has made. He is on the threshold of confronting the murder that he did commit, right? Not to use excessively loaded language around suicide and the taking of one's own life, but he's almost there, which means that the progression to Life Extension within the fictional world, within the dream world, makes a lot of sense. And I really like that and how that plays out. And then Tilda Swinton's a goddamn rock star. She's just brilliant. Yeah. We get the video that we watched, the introduction to Life Extension, as a technology, I suppose. Oh, we should mention too, there have been these moments of weird advanced technology through the film. There's the
Benny the dog. Yeah.
Benny the dog, certainly, yes. But the holographic jazz player at the party, the weird camera, the wireless little camera, which now just looks like a GoPro and doesn't stand out at all. But we didn't have GoPros in 2001. You guys.
That was a big deal. That's a good point, darling.
A weirdly advanced technology that Jason Lee is just playing with, which I kind of like. And obviously we've got all of this other anachronistic technology and set dressing and theme, I suppose, running through the movie, particularly as we're getting these sequences where we're recreating these album covers and just kind of folding in all of this pop cultural ephemera into his experience of the world, which nominally is a thing that I like.
I think so.
But if you're Cameron Crowe, I think maybe you don't get to do that. I think if you are a writer, a director who is less obsessed with pop culture, you get to do things like that. But all of Cameron Crowe's films are just the enfolding of pop cultural ephemera into a storyline. So when it happens here, it maybe feels like him, playing a safety more than it feels like him actually asserting something that is more visually or cinematically or narratively powerful and intentional. It just kind of feels like that's what you do, Cam, right?
Yeah.
David runs, he's calling out to tech support. Good Vibrations is playing.
I had forgotten about that tech support. I was like, I remember this.
It's silly. It's a little silly.
It is like a prayer. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's maybe what doesn't work for me specifically about tech support, is just that it's insufficiently specific. Yeah. It should be, you have a code word. You have a thing that you say to summon tech support.
But if you're dreaming, like, how much can you even remember about, like, are you going to remember your code word?
Well, that's exactly what I'm thinking, though, right? We have all of this language that recurs in and out of the dreams, or in and out of the various levels of the various dreams throughout the entire movie. If one of those is a code word, if one of those is a safe word, right? I'm tapping out, I'm saying purple monkey banana shines, like I'm saying whatever it is I need to say to make this stop. I think if it's more specific, then it works better for me than just tech support. Yeah. Which feels a little, a little weird.
Fair enough.
We then get the long scene in the elevator, which
it's kind of cool.
I think, the dialogue here is just pitched at a point that works for me. I like what we're getting. I like the feel of the scene. I like the texture of the scene. This impossibly elevated building right at the heart of New York is so good and so right, you're bringing in some of that magical realism there. You're bringing in some, this is just subtly impossible in a way that I really like and appreciate. And then we elevate again a little bit when we get to the rooftop, when we get to the actual confrontation, right? The reference to the people are waiting for you to make your decision and we just barrel the camera.
That's right.
Is so interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that I liked that, but yes, it was interesting.
See, that's going to split the audience. You're either going to be here for that divisive. Or not. Yeah. Yes. But it ties to Kurt Russell and his whole line about, mortality being the new mass entertainment. Yeah. Which I don't think there's space in this film for that. I don't think
everything that Kurt Russell does once he not Kurt Russell specifically, but everything they do with McCabe when he gets onto the rooftop, just it gets silly. It gets parroting.
Can absolutely see why you want to bring him in there and why you want to have Jason Lee and why you want to have Penelope Cruz. I understand. I get it. That would be my instinct too. I think it makes it worse. I think every single one of those choices make that last moment worse. Yeah. We understand what is happening, or at least we believe we have internalized a version of events that's carried us this far. It's all about Cruz in that moment, and I don't need his conflict to be externalized still further, right?
Yeah.
I've got it. I'm here. I'm doing it.
Yeah.
What do you think of the choice of Gregory Peck in To Kill a Mockingbird as the ultimate, like,
of course he
authority
is.
dad?
He is. Yeah. Atticus Finch. Yes. Can't pick a better one.
What's so brilliant for me when it is revealed, all of Kurt Russell's performance suddenly makes so much more sense because it's really good. It's a really close, imitation of that performance, as well as being indisputably Kurt Russell. It's just there's a real warmth.
I couldn't believe I didn't recognize his voice in the opening narration.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't. Or the voiceover, I guess I should say. Yeah, I didn't recognize him until I saw his face. It's like, holy smokes, of course it is.
We've breezed past it. I'm going to say since we're praising Kurt Russell, and he is deserving of that praise, I'm going to say my least favorite line from the entire film, which is when he's talking about, like, he's connecting emotionally with David, and they're both sitting on the floor with their backs against the wall.
Yeah.
And he's talking about, growing up. He's talking about the thesis of the film, that eventually you set away these tokens of romanticism, and instead you settle into life that is real and might not be glamorous, but is all the more worth it, all the more substantial for
Sweet
that.
with the sour, whatever it was.
Yeah. His favorite Beatle was once John. Now it's Paul. That is the saddest thing that anyone has ever said. Your favorite Beatle should not be Paul. Think more of yourself than that. Secondly, Paul McCartney wrote a song for this movie.
Yep.
So praising him
seems
as the example of, like, just like a normal guy, not one of these crazy, rebellious youths like John Lennon, but like a real solid dude, like the incalculably wealthy Paul McCartney. It's such a terrible line. It's such a terrible moment. God damn this movie. Anyway, from there, David jumps off of a building and
jumps off the building. Sure.
Yeah, and we get what can only have been in 2001 an extremely expensive digital effect of him plummeting toward the earth. Then the opening eyes. We are supposed to infer, is back in the real world 150
years later.
If we believe the whole story that is given to him by tech support, who is categorically a product of his own imagination.
Yeah. So who even knows? Yeah.
I should say that Cameron Crowe himself offers 5 possible interpretations of this film. Number one.
Seems like such an arbitrary number, but okay.
It is, because a couple of these definitely do not pass. A couple of these are definitely implausible. Number one, tech support is telling the truth. 150 years have passed since Ames killed himself, and subsequent events form the lucid dream, right? We really do cut hard in the middle of the film. Everything after that midpoint when he passes out on the street is the dream. Everything before that is real life as he is perhaps remembering it in his lucid dream state, but all of that did actually happen, and tech support is telling the truth. So that's a possibility. That's a strong possibility. I think particularly if you lean into that, embrace the real in all of its ugly pain, right? Like, be a normal person in the world and find the joy in that. That's okay. There's something there. Explanation 2. The entire film is a dream, evidenced by a sticker on Ames's car that reads 2:30:01. And of course, February 30th does not exist. And in fact, that sticker appears on 2 different cars in the opening parts of the film. February 30th doesn't exist. Thus, the entire film is a dream. And possibly it is still the product of a similar technology. It is possibly the product of the same technology, but that we can't trust the first half of the film either.
Okay.
That all of this could be speculative, which is interesting in as much as, the billionaire philanthropist playboy who owns a magazine company in 2001 is, that is an implausible figure, right? So maybe we understand that David was never either side of this transaction and that the explanation is much more mundane, perhaps. 3, the events after the crash are a dream that Ames has while he is comatose. So he will wake up not 150 years in the future, having undergone this weird technology, but actually just will wake up in hospital after the crash.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Fine. But that doesn't get you anything.
No.
That doesn't do anything
boring answer,
philosophically or metaphysically within the span of the film at all. 4, and this is my least favorite, the entire film is the plot of the book that Brian is writing. Okay, maybe.
Okay.
If so, then what?
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't collapse the narrative frame even.
Yeah.
So it's a story that he's writing instead of a film that we are watching. Okay, then what is the meaning of the story that he is writing? You've only added like another layer of subcreation into this mix, and we don't need it because this thing is already a lasagna. Right?
Yeah.
We're good for layers. Thank you. The fifth explanation, the entire film after the crash is an hallucination caused by drugs administered during his reconstructive surgery, which is just exactly the same as
It's the same.
he's waking up after the surgery. Yeah. Which means that Cameron Crowe really did intend it to be the first superficial meaning. He doesn't necessarily intend the film to be confusing. I don't think that his intention is to create this Lynchian magic box of wonder where anybody can look at this film and find something different, find a different meaning. I think it's very literal and I think it's very straightforward. And I like the conclusion that he comes to. That's the thing, is that I like that story.
Yeah.
But it's so obfuscated for no reason that I find it harder to connect with it. God knows I certainly find it harder to recommend it.
Yeah.
It's a conundrum.
Yeah. I think I will probably end up watching it again just because it was almost like watching it for the first time because it had been so long. It had been 25 years since I'd seen it or whatever. So I might do that again just to kind of see if I can pull on some threads or see if that's interesting there. And because I do find Penelope Cruz so magnetic. I think it's an extraordinary performance.
So lovely. Does the film,
and the movie's so lovely.
Does the film serve her badly by losing track of her as we move through the story, right? Like Sophia is barely a character at all, even at the best and most generous interpretation of the film. We just kind of shake her out of his paranoid delusion by the end of the movie. That seems like a bad use of Penelope Cruz in a sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. But I mean, I don't see how they could have done anything else given what the movie's about.
That's fair. That's fair. She's the doctor this whole time.
Yeah. The doctor was his wife, or mother, or whatever it is.
I can't operate on this man. I'm a fiction of his dream world. So before we wrestle with the inevitable and try and put this movie on our big list of every Tom Cruise movie ever, I would like to give you the opportunity to just give us a gloss of your feelings here. Overall, what do you make of this film? What do you think of its intent? What do you think of its... I've talked a lot extensively about what I take to be its philosophy and its meaning and how we are supposed to read it and how I do end up reading it. I'd love to know how you feel about this film overall.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything very different to say. I mean, I overall, again, think it's really quite gorgeous and just a cool vibe. Like, it's fun to watch. A little bit of a letdown at the end because they just try to tie it up together too nicely for something that just cannot. Like, you've broken it into too many pieces on the floor. You can't glue it back together for us and have us just say, oh yeah, that's going to hold water now. It's not. It's going to be dripping all over the place. And that's okay, I guess. But there's a reason too that this movie has not stuck around. Like, people don't watch it. And I think experiential, but there's just no there.
So you would have preferred it had it been just a more conventional movie. If we hadn't been trying to ape Shyamalan as much as we evidently are, right? If we were a little less twisty and just a little more straightforward, you think the movie would have been more effective overall?
Or if we had just been, more Lynchian and not even tried to resolve it. If we had just let it go. But yeah, we end up in a weird spot where it's trying to convince you that it's smarter than it is.
Yeah, and also its virtue is not perhaps in its smartness. It's not in its twistiness. Mm-hmm. It's in its heart, which when Cameron Crowe delivers that sentimentality, I think it's very effective. There's a reason that Jerry Maguire is number one on our list. Speaking of that list, what do you think? Right under Jerry Maguire at the top of the list, right above Top Gun? Is that what we're thinking here?
I'm thinking about sticking this one in somewhere between, I think maybe between Far and Away and Eyes Wide Shut.
Oh, that's interesting. Eyes Wide Shut as a point of comparison, I think is really applicable here because it has a similar kind of apparent depth, but perhaps insubstantialness.
Yes. And both really visually stunning.
Yes, though I am less moved by Kubrick than most people, and I think probably more moved by Crowe than most people. So I think I might put this film
it's our list, so
above it, honestly.
We get to put it above Eyes Wide Shut. I love
that. That's interesting. Certainly there's a rich territory here between Legend at number 9 and Eyes Wide Shut at number 11. It's not at all like Far and Away, which is at number 10, despite the fact that it's occupying a very similar space. I could see it being also around Legend in terms of its evocation of something that is very ambitious, right? But ultimately thin, ultimately as straightforward as it seems to be. So I could see that too. But I'll leave it to you. Above or below Far and Away? Let's slot it in there.
Yeah,
Does that feel right to you?
That does feel right to me. Okay. Let's put it maybe just above Far and Away for a real swing,
It is certainly a real swing. Yeah. And Penelope Cruz is wonderful.
And for Penelope Cruz.
Penelope Cruz is wonderful. Kurt Russell is wonderful.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise, I think, honestly,
wonderful,
pretty consistently wonderful.
Production design off the charts. Soundtrack,
Production design
amazing.
off the charts. Yep.
Yeah.
A lot a lot to like about this film that is let down crucially in a few very severe ways.
Yes.
I guess we didn't even talk about it ultimately. What do you think of Jason Lee? Do you like him as we come out of this film? No, he's still
No, I just never buy him.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah.
I think it's a bad choice for Crowe. I think it's a bad choice for this film. I think we needed someone a little more grounded, a little more Ben Affleck. Yeah, a little less just snide and above it all in that very, early 2000s Jason Lee hipstery way that he has. But that's where it goes on the list. The new number 10, right above Far and Away, a surprisingly high spot in some ways, but also a disappointingly low spot for the follow-up to Jerry Maguire. That is going to do it for this week's show. Everything we do here at The Last Star in Hollywood is supported by you, our very generous, very wonderful, and dare I say, charming patrons? We're very charming patrons. If we were going to dream away our lives in a tank, just producing podcast after podcast after podcast like a lucid dream that stretches into infinity, you would be our stars in the horizon. You would be the ones that keep us going.
Penelope Cruz.
You would be our Penelope Cruz, and I can say no better than that. Elizabeth, would you like to thank our wonderful patrons?
Heartfelt thanks to Leslie Skipa, Louise in Dallas, Megan Lauder, Phoebe, Art Kilmer, Kimberly Bear, Self on a Shelf, Jolene Stark, and Chris Dawns. Truly thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You are the reason that we get to continue doing this into the second half of Tom Cruise's career, which, as I mentioned last week, is going to be a wilder ride than the first half. Higher highs, but boy howdy, some lower lows too. Not to worry, though, because next week we've got a good one. Next week we've got a real high point. We've got the first of the 2 Cruise-Spielberg collaborations. We didn't even mention Spielberg's cameo in this film.
Did he have one?
Yes, he's at the birthday party. He's the guy who comes up to David, you son of a bitch, and gives him the big manly handshake. That's Steven Spielberg.
Playing himself, supposedly?
Presumably playing himself.
That's funny. Okay, cool.
Though much more importantly, he will direct next week's movie, the first of their 2 collaborations, Minority Report.
Cool.
That's a humdinger.
That's going to be fun.
That's a home run of a movie, that one. I'm really looking forward to talking about that. Until then, thank you so much for listening.
And we'll see you next time.